Just eat, the man said, his voice low but firm, the kind of tone that expected obedience without question, and the boy did not move, not even slightly, his small hands resting on either side of the untouched plate as if time had paused around him, and the noise of the restaurant continued without interruption, glasses clinking, quiet laughter rising and falling, the soft hum of conversation filling the air. But at that table, something felt different, something heavier, as if the space itself had narrowed around the silence between them, and Daniel Whitmore leaned back slightly in his chair, adjusting his cuff with controlled impatience, his expression composed but strained in a way that only showed itself in small details, the tightening of his jaw, the brief exhale through his nose, the glance that lingered just a second too long on the boy before shifting away again, and across from him, Ethan remained still. His eyes not focused on the food, not on his father, but somewhere in between, distant, unreachable, and it was the kind of stillness that did not look like defiance, did not look like choice, but something else entirely, something quieter, something harder to understand, and a couple seated nearby noticed, their voices lowering slightly, their attention flickering toward the table before politely returning to their own conversation, because in a place like this, discomfort was something people acknowledged only briefly before looking away, and Daniel reached for his glass, taking a measured sip, his posture still controlled, still composed, but the rhythm of the evening had already shifted, the seamless flow of his usual world interrupted by something he could not direct, could not fix with a word or a gesture, and behind them, moving between tables with practiced ease, Lena Carter carried a tray balanced perfectly in one hand, her steps quiet, her presence almost invisible in the way that good service often was, unnoticed until needed, and yet her attention was not scattered, not detached, it moved carefully through the room, observing without intruding, sensing the subtle changes in tone that others ignored, and when she passed their table, it was not the silence alone that caught her attention, it was the weight of it, the way it settled unevenly, the way the boy's stillness did not match the environment around him, and she slowed slightly, just enough to register the details without breaking her rhythm, the untouched plate, the rigid posture, the father's controlled frustration, and something in that moment felt familiar, not in a way that demanded action, but in a way that lingered. And she continued walking, setting down a glass at another table, offering a polite nod, her movements precise and professional, but her awareness did not leave that corner of the room, it stayed there, quiet, steady, returning to it even as she completed the next task, and back at the table, Daniel leaned forward again, his voice lower now, more contained, as if trying to manage the situation without drawing attention, repeating the same instruction with slightly more emphasis. But the result did not change, and Ethan remained exactly as he was, unmoved, untouched by the words directed at him, and for a brief moment, Daniel's composure faltered just enough to be seen, not loudly, not dramatically, but in the way his hand paused mid-motion, in the way his gaze lingered on the boy with something that was not just frustration, but uncertainty, and that uncertainty did not belong in his world, did not fit the structure of control he was used to. And the room continued around them, unaware of the quiet struggle unfolding at that table. Unaware that something small and invisible was about to shift everything. The moment did not resolve itself, it stretched, lingering in the quiet tension that Daniel could not control, and he shifted slightly in his chair, his movements precise but carrying an edge of restraint, as if he were holding back something that did not belong in a place like this, and his gaze returned to Ethan again, searching this time, not commanding, but trying to find a way in, and the boy remained unchanged, his posture still rigid, his focus still somewhere distant, untouched by the words spoken to him, and around them the restaurant continued its steady rhythm, wait staff moving with practiced ease, conversations flowing, cutlery softly touching plates. But at their table, everything felt suspended, disconnected from the world just a few feet away, and Daniel leaned forward once more, lowering his voice even further, his tone shifting from instruction to something closer to persuasion, as if altering the approach might somehow reach through the silence. But the effect was the same, no response, no movement. Only the quiet presence of a child who was not resisting, not refusing, but simply not therein the way Daniel needed him to be, and the difference frustrated him more than open defiance ever could, because there was nothing to argue against, nothing to correct, and he exhaled slowly, leaning back again, his fingers tapping lightly against the edge of the table before stopping, as if even that small sound felt too sharp in the stillness. And across the room, Lena paused briefly near a service station, her hands resting lightly on the edge of a counter as she arranged a set of utensils. With careful precision, her movements automatic, but her attention not fully there, because she could still feel the weight of that table, the imbalance of it, the way the child's silence carried something deeper than simple stubbornness, and she glanced in that direction again, not openly, not in a way that would draw notice, but enough to observe, to confirm what she had sensed before, and the scene had not changed, the boy still unmoving. The father still trying to maintain control over something that did not respond to it, and for a moment, Lena's expression softened just slightly, not out of pity, but recognition, because she had seen that kind of stillness before, not in restaurants like this, but in quieter places, in smaller rooms, where silence meant something different, where it was not about ignoring or refusing, but about being overwhelmed in ways that could not be explained easily. And the memory passed quickly, not lingering long enough to distract her from her work, but leaving behind a clarity that shaped how she understood what she was seeing, and she picked up a tray again, steadying it with practiced ease, her posture returning to its professional calm, and she moved back into the flow of the room, weaving between tables, responding to subtle gestures, refilling glasses, maintaining the seamless experience expected in a place like this, and yet, as she approached that table once more, the awareness remained, not pressing her forward, not urging action, but present, quiet, waiting, and Daniel, unaware of her attention, reached for his phone briefly, glancing at the screen as if grounding himself in something familiar, something controllable, before setting it back down again, his focus returning to Ethan with a different kind of uncertainty now, less sharp, more unsettled, and for the first time that evening, there was a pause where he did not speak at all, where he simply looked at his son without instruction, without expectation, and the silence between them deepened, not louder, not heavier, but more visible, as if it had taken shape in the space they shared. And Lena slowed as she neared the table, her steps measured, her presence still. Unobtrusive, but closer now, close enough to feel the stillness directly, to stand at the edge of it, and in that moment, nothing had changed yet, but something was about to. The distance between observation and action narrowed in a way that felt almost imperceptible, and Lena stood just within reach of the table now, not intruding, not interrupting, but present enough to feel the rhythm of that silence from the inside rather than the edge, and it was different here, heavier, more contained, as if everything unsaid had gathered into a single space between father and son, and Daniel remained still, his earlier attempts fading into something quieter, something less certain, as he watched Ethan without speaking, without directing, and in that pause, the absence of control became more visible than any command had been, and Lena noticed it, not as weakness, but as unfamiliarity, the way someone used to shaping outcomes found himself in a moment that would not respond, and her gaze shifted briefly to the child, careful, soft, not searching for reaction but reading what was already there. The slight tension in his shoulders, the fixed position of his hands, the distant focus of his eyes, and it aligned with something she understood not from theory, not from assumption, but from experience that had never needed to be explained in words, and she felt that recognition settle quietly, not urging her forward, but clarifying what she already sensed, and Daniel shifted again, his hand moving toward the plate before stopping halfway, as if unsure whether to continue, and that hesitation, small as it was, carried more truth than anything he had said so far, because it revealed that he no longer knew what would work, and the room continued around them, untouched, unaware, and Lena made a decision that did not feel like a decision at all, but a natural extension of what she understood, and she stepped closer, not abruptly, not with intention to disrupt, but with the same calm precision she carried in every movement, and when she reached the side of the table, she did not speak immediately, she did not announce herself. She simply lowered herself slowly, carefully, until she was no longer standing above the child, but level with him, her presence shifting from distant to near without force, without pressure, and Daniel's gaze lifted slightly, catching the movement, a flicker of surprise crossing his expression before settling into something more guarded, more alert, as if unsure how to respond to what he was seeing, and Lena remained still once she was there, her hands resting lightly in front of her. Not reaching, not invading space, just existing within it, and she allowed the silence to remain, did not try to fill it, did not try to change it, because she understood that the stillness was not something to break, it was something to meet, and for a moment, nothing happened, no visible shift, no immediate response, and yet the atmosphere altered in a way that was difficult to name, softer, less rigid, as if the space itself had adjusted to her presence, and Daniel watched. His posture no longer defined by control, but by attention, and though he had not spoken, though he had not given permission, he did not interrupt, and that absence of interruption became its own kind of allowance, and Lena remained there, steady, patient, her focus gentle but unwavering. Waiting without expectation, knowing that whatever came next could not be rushed, could not be forced, and in that quiet alignment, something began to change, not visibly, not all at once, but in the subtle shift of a moment that was no longer held together by tension alone. Daniel's voice came quietly but with tension beneath it, asking what she thought she was doing, not loud enough to draw attention from the rest of the room, but sharp enough to re-establish the boundary he was used to maintaining, and Lena did not look up immediately, did not react to the tone, because she understood that the moment was not about him, not yet, and instead she kept her posture steady, her presence calm, her gaze resting softly near the child without forcing contact, and for a brief second, Daniel waited for her to step back, to return to the role he expected, but she did not move, and that stillness unsettled him more than defiance would have, because it was not resistance, it was something else, something that did not respond to authority in the usual way, and he shifted slightly in his seat, his hand resting against the edge of the table as if grounding himself, and he repeated himself. This time more controlled, reminding her to focus on her job, to not interfere. And the words carried the weight of habit, of a life where instructions were followed without question, but Lena remained exactly where she was, her expression unchanged, her posture unchanged, not ignoring him, but not stepping away either, because what she was doing was not about stepping in, it was about staying present, and for a moment, the tension between them existed quietly, not escalating, not breaking, just holding. And then something subtle shifted, not in Daniel, not in the room, but in the space between Lena and the child, and without speaking, without announcing anything, she moved her hand slightly, not toward him, but closer, placing it gently on the table within reach, not touching, not asking, simply offering a point of connection without expectation, and the movement was small, almost invisible, but it changed the dynamic of the space, because it introduced something new, something that did not demand response, and Ethan's fingers, which had remained still for so long, did not react immediately, but the stillness around them felt different now, less rigid, less sealed, as if a door had opened just slightly, and Daniel noticed it, of course he did, his attention sharpening, his posture leaning forward just enough to catch any change, and yet he did not speak again, because something in the moment held him back. Something he did not fully understand but could not ignore, and the restaurant continued around them, the soft clinking of glasses, the quiet murmur of conversation, but at that table, everything had narrowed to a single point of quiet focus, and Lena remained steady, her breathing slow, her presence unwavering, not watching for a result, not waiting for confirmation, just allowing the moment to exist without pressure, and seconds passed, long enough to feel, short enough to remain fragile. And then, almost imperceptibly, Ethan's hand shifted, not fully, not deliberately, but enough to break the stillness that had held him in place, and the movement was small, but it carried weight, because it was the first sign of response, the first change in a silence that had seemed immovable, and Daniel saw it, his expression tightening not with control, but with something closer to disbelief, and Lena did not react outwardly, did not move closer, did not change her posture, because she understood that the moment was not something to capture, it was something to protect. And so she stayed exactly as she was, steady, calm, present, as the space between them continued to shift in a way that no one at that table had expected. The movement did not stop after that first shift, it lingered, fragile but real, and Ethan's fingers remained where they had moved, no longer completely still, no longer locked in that distant place, and Lena did not react to it, not outwardly, because she understood that even the smallest change could disappear if it was met with too much attention, too much expectation, and so she kept her posture exactly the same. Her hand still resting lightly on the table within reach, not closer, not further, just present, and the space between them held steady, balanced, delicate in a way that made even the air feel softer, and Daniel leaned forward slightly, unable to look away now, his earlier authority replaced by something more uncertain, more focused, as he watched his son with a kind of attention he had not allowed himself before, not trying to guide, not trying to correct, but simply observing, and that shift in him was quiet but significant, because it meant letting go of the instinct to intervene, to control what he did not understand, and the restaurant continued around them, unaware of the small transformation unfolding at that table, the soft sounds of conversation and glassware fading into the background as the moment narrowed again to something intimate and precise, and Lena adjusted her breathing, slow and steady, her presence grounded in a way that did not demand anything from Ethan, and seconds passed, long enough to feel the weight of waiting. And then, slowly, almost cautiously, Ethan's hand moved again. This time more clearly, more intentionally, his fingers extending just enough to close the distance, and they came to rest lightly against hers, not gripping, not holding tightly, but touching, a connection so gentle it could have been missed by anyone not watching closely, and yet it carried more meaning than anything that had happened before, because it was chosen, not prompted, and Lena remained still, her hand not tightening, not shifting, simply receiving the contact without changing it, allowing Ethan to control the moment entirely, and Daniel's breath caught slightly, the reaction subtle but visible in the way his shoulders lifted just a fraction before settling again, his eyes fixed on the point of contact as if trying to understand how something so small could feel so significant, and he did not speak, did not move closer, because something in him recognized that this was not his moment to shape. And the silence that followed was no longer tense, it was full, filled with something that had not existed before, something that replaced the earlier distance with a quiet connection, and Ethan's posture softened just slightly, the rigid stillness easing as he leaned forward a fraction, his attention no longer entirely distant, and Lena adjusted only enough to support that shift without directing it, her presence steady, her focus gentle, and the room, though unchanged on the surface, felt different in that space, because the barrier that had separated them was no longer intact, and Daniel remained where he was, watching, learning in a way he had not expected. His expression no longer defined by frustration, but by realization, as the moment continued to unfold. Without words, without instruction, held together by nothing more than patience and quiet understanding. The connection did not break, it deepened, not through movement, not through words, but through the quiet consistency of presence, and Ethan's fingers remained resting against Lena's hand, not gripping, not pulling away, simply staying, and that stillness carried a different meaning now, no longer distant, no longer unreachable, but grounded, present in a way that Daniel had not seen before, and he remained seated. His posture no longer rigid, his hands resting loosely on the table as if even the smallest movement might disturb something fragile, and for the first time that evening, he did not try to speak, did not try to guide, because what he was witnessing did not respond to instruction, it responded to something else entirely, something he was only beginning to understand, and Lena remained exactly where she was, her breathing steady, her posture unchanged, her attention fully with Ethan without overwhelming him. And the space around them seemed to soften, the noise of the restaurant fading into the background as if it had moved further away, leaving only the quiet rhythm of the moment between them, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, Ethan's posture shifted again, his shoulders relaxing just enough to release the tension that had held him so tightly, and his head tilted slightly, not away, but closer, his presence leaning into the space Lena had created. And she adjusted only as much as needed, not leading, not directing, but supporting the shift without interrupting it, and Daniel noticed everything, every subtle change, every small movement that carried meaning far beyond its size, and something in him responded, not with control, but with recognition, the realization that what he had been trying to force could not be reached that way, and that understanding settled into him quietly, reshaping the way he saw the moment. And as the seconds passed, Ethan's hand remained in place, his breathing steady now, no longer shallow, no longer uneven. And the distance that had once separated him from everything around him seemed to close just slightly, enough to be felt, enough to matter. And Lena did not change her expression, did not react outwardly, because she understood that the moment was not about reaction, it was about continuity, about maintaining the calm that had allowed this connection to form. And so she stayed grounded, present, her focus unwavering, and Daniel leaned back just slightly, not retreating, but giving space, allowing the moment to exist without interference. And that choice, small as it was, marked a shift in him, a movement away from control and toward understanding, and the room, though unchanged in appearance, felt different in that space, quieter, more centered, as if something had aligned beneath the surface, and no one around them seemed to notice, no one turned, no one spoke, because the transformation unfolding at that table did not announce itself, it existed quietly, held together by patience and presence, and in that stillness, something that had once felt unreachable was now within reach. Not fully, not completely, but enough to change everything moving forward. The moment held, not fragile anymore, but steady in a way that made it feel real, and Ethan did not pull his hand away, he did not retreat back into that distant place, instead he stayed, his fingers still resting lightly against Lena's, and the contact, simple as it was, became something grounding, something that anchored him in the present, and Lena remained exactly as she had been, her posture calm, her breathing slow, her presence unchanged, because she understood that what mattered now was not what came next, but what continued, the quiet consistency that allowed trust to take shape. And Daniel watched, not with urgency, not with confusion anymore, but with a growing awareness that settled deeper with every second, and he shifted slightly in his chair, not moving closer, not interrupting, but adjusting himself into the moment in a way that felt unfamiliar, as if he were learning how to exist within something he could not control. And for a long second, nothing changed outwardly, and yet everything beneath the surface continued to move. Because Ethan's shoulders relaxed further, the tension that had once held him in place now easing in small, almost invisible increments, and then, slowly, he leaned, just slightly, his body shifting toward Lena in a way that was not dramatic, not sudden, but intentional, and his head tilted enough that it brushed gently against her arm, a contact so light it could have been missed, but it carried weight, because it was trust, unspoken and unforced, and Lena responded not by reacting, not by drawing attention to it, but by adjusting just enough to support him, her arm steady, her posture softening to hold that connection without changing its nature. And Daniel felt it, not as a visible reaction, but as something that settled in his chest, something quiet and undeniable, and his expression shifted, the sharp edges of control softening into something else, something closer to understanding, and for the first time, he saw clearly what had been missing, not effort, not intention, but approach. And that realization did not come as a sudden revelation, it unfolded gradually, shaped by what he was witnessing rather than what he was being told, and he lowered his gaze briefly, not in defeat, but in thought, as if reconsidering everything he had tried before, every word, every attempt to guide, and how none of it had reached this moment. And when he looked up again, his focus was different, no longer fixed on what needed to change, but on what was already happening, and he remained still, allowing it to continue, and around them, the restaurant carried on. Unaware, unchanged, but at that table, something had shifted completely, and it did not need recognition, it did not need explanation, because it existed fully in the quiet space between them, held together by patience, by presence, and by a kind of understanding that did not rely on words. And Lena stayed there, steady, grounded, not leading, not following, simply allowing the moment to unfold as it was meant to, and Ethan remained with her, no longer distant, no longer unreachable, but present, in a way that changed everything without a single word being spoken. The moment did not break, it expanded, settling into something deeper, something that no longer felt temporary, and Ethan remained where he was, his small frame leaning gently against Lena, his breathing steady and calm, no longer distant, no longer withdrawn, and Lena did not move away, did not shift the balance of what had formed, her presence still grounded, still quiet, allowing him to stay exactly where he needed to be without interruption. And Daniel watched from across the table, his posture softened, his hands no longer resting with control but with stillness, as if he understood now that even the smallest movement could change what was unfolding, and the realization continued to build within him, not sudden, not overwhelming, but steady, shaped by what he was seeing rather than what he had been told, and for a moment, he looked at his son in a way that was different from before, not searching for response, not expecting change, but simply seeing him as he was, present in a way he had not been earlier, and that shift carried weight, because it replaced expectation with acceptance, and slowly, Daniel leaned back slightly, not retreating, but giving space, allowing the connection between them to continue without interference, and Lena noticed it, not directly, but in the way the tension in the room eased further, the pressure that had once surrounded the table now gone, replaced by something quieter, more open, and she adjusted only slightly, enough to support Ethan's posture as he remained close, her movements gentle, instinctive, shaped by understanding rather than instruction, and the restaurant continued around them, the soft glow of light reflecting off glass and polished surfaces, the low hum of conversation blending into the background, but at that table, everything felt separate, contained within a moment that no one else could see, and Daniel's gaze lingered, not with disbelief anymore, but with recognition, and that recognition began to settle into something else, something deeper, as he lowered his eyes briefly, his expression thoughtful, almost reflective, as if he were reconsidering everything he had believed about control, about connection, about what it meant to reach someone who could not be reached through force or instruction. And when he looked up again, his expression had changed, not dramatically, not in a way that demanded attention, but in the subtle softening of his features, in the absence of tension that had defined him earlier, and Lena remained steady, her focus still with Ethan, not seeking acknowledgement, not waiting for a response from Daniel, because the moment was not about recognition, it was about continuity, about allowing what had begun to remain intact. And Ethan stayed where he was, no longer pulled away, no longer resisting, simply present, and the space between all three of them settled into a quiet balance, one that did not need words, did not need explanation, because it existed fully in the stillness, and Daniel did not speak, did not interrupt, because he understood now that some moments were not meant to be guided, only witnessed, and in that understanding, something within him shifted completely, not loudly, not visibly, but in a way that would not return to what it had been before, as the silence held, no longer uncertain, but full, steady, and quietly transformative. The moment did not need to be extended to be understood, it had already settled into something lasting, something that would remain long after the evening ended, and Lena stayed where she was for a few seconds longer, just enough to ensure that the calm she had helped create did not break, her posture still steady, her presence still gentle, as Ethan remained leaning quietly against her, his breathing even, his small hand still resting against hers without tension, and when she finally shifted, it was slow, careful, almost unnoticeable, easing her hand away without pulling, without disrupting, allowing the connection to release naturally rather than end abruptly. And Ethan did not react with withdrawal, he did not return to that distant place, instead he remained present, his posture still relaxed, his focus no longer lost, and that alone was enough to confirm what had changed, and Lena rose gradually, returning to her full height with the same quiet composure she had carried from the beginning, her expression unchanged, her movements precise, as if nothing extraordinary had happened, and yet everything had, and Daniel watched her, his gaze steady, not following out of curiosity, but out of recognition, because he understood now that what he had witnessed could not be explained by training or instruction, it had come from something deeper, something he had not known how to reach, and he remained seated for a moment longer, looking at his son, truly looking, without expectation, without pressure, and Ethan met that moment differently now, not with words, Not with a dramatic shift, but with presence, with a quiet awareness. That had not been there before, and that was enough, more than enough, and Daniel exhaled slowly, the tension that had once defined him no longer present, replaced by something quieter, something grounded, and when he finally stood, his movement was not sharp, not controlled in the same way, but measured, thoughtful, and he adjusted the chair slightly before stepping back, giving space not out of distance, but out of understanding. And Lena had already returned to her work, lifting a tray, moving between tables with the same calm rhythm, her role unchanged on the surface, but no longer invisible in the way it had been before, and though she did not look back, did not seek acknowledgement, the awareness remained, carried in the way the space around her had shifted, in the way Daniel's gaze lingered for just a moment longer before returning to his son, and the restaurant continued as it always had, the soft lighting, the quiet conversations, the steady movement of service, but at that table, something had been altered in a way that would not fade, and no words were needed to confirm it, no apology, no explanation, because the moment had already said everything that mattered, and as Lena moved through the room, her presence blending once again into the flow of the evening, the difference between being unseen and being understood remained, quiet, steady, and permanent, held not in what was spoken, but in what had finally been felt.